Want to talk about X-Men?
Yeah, let's do that. I don't know about you, but I'm excited.
Well, there's a shit ton to talk about because
There's so much to talk about.
Hickman doesn't know how to write.
No, save it. Save it for when we get started.
Not saying he doesn't know how to write.
Right? And I cut you off at just the right moment. Edit that into our little preview for the episode. Hickman doesn't know how to write.
Hickman doesn't know how to write.
He doesn't know words and letters, syntax.
What is that man doing?
Okay, let's just jump right into it. I'll do a little intro here.
All right.
Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to episode 80 of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing Powers of X and House of X by Jonathan Hickman and two artists. This is embarrassing. I already forgot their name. Hang on, I wrote it down. Pepe Larraz did House of X, and Powers of X was by R.B. Silva. I did not intend to do that, but I apologize.
All right.
This is we'll continue with this introduction. My name is Aaron Walther. You know me, I'm the one who does this show, and with me is my longtime friend and regular co-host, Alex Harner. Alex, thank you for
good to be the foil.
Being here to talk about the X-Men again. I know how hard it is to get you to talk about the X-Men.
It's just like pulling teeth.
So this is like kind of a unnatural thing for us to do, is like we're talking about not just a relatively recent book, but an extremely recent book. These books just came out last month. And I assume most people probably know what this is, but you know, if you're watching this like in the far future and you're just kind of looking back, you don't really know what we're talking about. Jonathan Hickman has rebooted the X-Men line for Marvel. Essentially, I'm going to call it a reboot. And it's done with these two series called one House of X, one Powers of X, and they came out simultaneously. And it's kind of a wiping of the slate. Like Marvel canceled all their previous X-Men books. These were the only two X-Men books coming out at the time. Am I correct?
As far as I know.
And then it's kind of set up the foundation for where the X-Men books are going to go in the future. So now we're going into like the series has ended now. So now we're going into like regular ongoing series. It's like 6 or 7 series, right, that they've got planned.
Yeah, they've established a new status quo, and they're kind of, you know, as they've done in the past, they're sort of relaunching a line with books that are, you know, supposedly each having a unique identity that fleshes out different sides of Marvel's mutant universe.
Right. But we're not really going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about this this initial series, this House of X, Powers of X series, and I don't want to show my hand too early, but we were reading this as it came out, and we actually discussed about whether or not we should do podcasts on each issue as it's coming out, because this is going to be a series that we're actually reading in real time, as it were, as opposed to going back and looking at something retrospectively. And I'm glad we decided not to, because I think in general our discussions, there's more to discuss on the completed product or the completed story than there is kind of following it. But my experience reading this was I actually felt like I'm kind of the target audience for this book, perhaps. It's hard to tell, but I consider myself a lapsed X-Men fan. I was a regular Wednesday comic book reader, and X-Men was a book that I really liked. And frankly, I haven't actually liked the book since roughly the end of Grant Morrison's run in like, what was that? Like 2004 or 5? Was it that early?
I think it was around there.
I think it really was that long ago, which it's like actually kind of shocking to me that it's been that long.
Yeah.
I've read a few issues.
Old.
Yeah, I know. I'm an old dude. I get told that all the time by the teenagers that I work with. But you know, I've read a few issues since then, here and there, but I've not been excited about collecting the book regularly since Grant Morrison's run. And so this series felt very much like very much like Marvel was trying to kind of get a fresh start, kind of approach the books in a grander sense, really bring back like the excitement of the X-Men and kind of the grandeur of them. And I was reading the issues, and I think I messaged you. I sent you a message. We talk outside of this podcast every now and then. And I had said something to you after like the first couple of weeks. I had something to you about like, it's so exciting, or it's nice to be excited to read the X-Men again.
Right. Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Look forward to like.
I was like, I was like really looking forward to reading the issues. And then about maybe halfway through, I think like issue 3 or 4 of House or Powers of X, I don't remember which one it was, I just stopped.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I got to stop this. I'll reread the whole thing when it comes out, as one story. But I could not keep up with it in a weekly basis. Like I just, I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to tip my hand too soon, but I had to just like take a step back and just reread the whole thing as a whole when it was finished, which I did. I actually read it twice.
Okay. Gotcha.
But so my question to you, Alex, and I just want, like, before we go into this, I have a simple yes or no question from you, or for you. A simple yes or no question. You don't have to overthink this. Just yes or no. Is this book pretentious?
Yes.
Yeah, that was where I was going too. I lean in that direction.
If you're making me pick yes or no.
Yes, I'm making you pick yes or no. There's no middle ground here.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the most pretentious. It could be more pretentious.
Oh, there's always room for more, but
it's
so I'll say that part of the reason that I had to quit reading it halfway through, and part of my frustration with this is I don't like that this is 2 series. That there's like a special reading order. I understand the practicality of needing 2 artists to kind of keep up with it. But why is this not just one 12-issue series? Why are we pretending that this is 2 6-issue series?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish I had an answer for you, but I am 2 things right now: A, unprepared, and B, a moron. So. If there was some secret code to decipher in the course of reading it, it went over my head. And that may be that I didn't give it its due. It's very possible. I didn't deep dive these issues.
I'm willing to accept that. Like, maybe I missed it. Maybe I did. But just for like as a casual, I don't even want to say casual reader, because like I did like seriously devote some time to this. And my problem, the reason I lean in the pretentious side is because each issue gives you the reading order that you're supposed to read it in. And I couldn't tell, like, each book did not have its own identity. It really just felt like 12 issues, like if you read it in that order. There's no way to read this as 2 different issues. Like I thought going into it, I really thought like one book would be more of like Professor Xavier's perspective, and another book would be more of Moira McTaggart's perspective, and then we would see them kind of clash and come together for a big, finale. That's not what happened. It was just the story just continued through each issue, alternating between artists.
Right.
And that's really what leads me toward the pretentious side. Like, is this just a way to like pretend it's bigger than it is? Like, pretend that it's like 2 series when really it's just 1. I don't understand why confuse everything with that.
My fear in having this conversation and putting it on the internet is that the first, someone's going to watch this and the first comment under our video is going to be, "Hey shitheads, here's why."
I'm going to out myself as an idiot.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we didn't pay much attention then.
Fair enough. I mean, like I said, I'm not ruling that out, but
it's possible, and please do call us out if there's a clear answer here, because I, as I said, I have not deep dived this. We both love the X-Men, but my thirst for X-Men scholarship at the moment is not such that I'm I'm on the internet every night researching the secret meanings of Hickman's new stuff.
Yeah, that's another thing. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think we're both probably cynical enough, given recent trends in writing, to where if there's something really good there, I'm waiting to hear about it, and I'll get involved. Like in terms of like
yes,
Alan Moore level Watchmen craft.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been enough entertainment in the past 15 years that basically has made its identity on creating mysteries that don't get answered and layering information that's really just there to create fan buzz on the internet.
Yes.
That I don't feel compelled to solve the riddle right now.
Yeah, because I don't believe there actually is a riddle. I think it's all
might not be.
It's all a big empty box. No, that's. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that about Hickman's X-Men, but I am saying that about the general trend in how serialized fiction is written. In, like, as you said, the past 15 years, basically since Lost. Lost
started it.
Lost ruined everything, and it works for a serialized format because it gets people talking and it gets people invested.
It creates conversation
and buzz, and
you post and you hashtag and you Facebook.
Yes. And I'm not going to say that doesn't have value. That's part of the entertainment is being plugged into it. That's part of the fun. But I don't actually like that. I want to read an actual story. I'm, literature. I'm a snob.
We're also pretentious, by the way.
Yes, well, I am pretentious. That's why I feel comfortable in calling this book pretentious, because there's nobody more pretentious than I. But well, I was going to say that is an interesting thing to point out too, is that I have not been plugged into the fan base at all. I have read nothing. I don't know what the conversation about this book is. I don't want to say nothing. I have a little idea. I understand it's getting a lot of praise from some fans, but I don't actually know really how it's been accepted and how it's doing. I assume it sold well. I mean, it almost has to. Like, it's like guaranteed.
As I understand it, it sold exceedingly well.
I'm not surprised. But I will say, one of the things that did kind of pull me into it is like I said, I'm not in message boards. I'm not part of like fan groups. I didn't read any reviews for this series at all. Like, not one. I don't even know if they exist. I assume they have to exist. But
oh, they're out there.
My social media is limited to just like a little bit of Facebook every now and then. I'm on Facebook and I like make posts about my comics, or I post pictures of cats. Like literally, that's it. And I actually, most of my friends list on Facebook are other comic creators, So I've got a couple of thousand other people, mostly related to comics in some form or another, mostly, artists and writers and whatnot. And I did see some buzz like show up from not like outside of fan related groups, of just people being like, the new exciting thing right now is X-Men, Jonathan Hickman. I saw people posting panels, saw people talking about how they cried when certain things happen to certain characters, which made me roll my eyes very hard. But it was getting some notoriety outside of just the fan areas, I guess you could say. You know what I mean? Like these are still comic book people, but it wasn't like, I wasn't in like a comic book group. I wasn't in like an X-Men discussion group, Like people just talking, like getting some buzz about this comic. So that's good.
Yeah.
So I kind of rambled on a little bit. I think we both agree that the book's pretentious. So now we should probably talk about what we actually thought about it.
Sure. That's like our that's our hot take to get people like listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
here's tell you how much we actually like most.
Exactly. Here's our starting point. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Our starting point is the book is pretentious, but I liked it. Probably not as much as I wanted to.
Okay.
I'll say this. Most of the characterization felt pretty on point. It was like nice to, like, it felt, a lot of the characters felt kind of classic in a way, like the little character moments felt good here and there. But ultimately I feel like it suffered from Hickman's dry clinical writing style, not having a central character to for the story to revolve around, which is ironic because I think it actually did have a central character, which was Moira McTaggart. I just don't think it was done that well. And I think the series was too long. It didn't need to be 12 issues to set this up. These ideas are not as profound as they're making it out to be. And frankly, I was a little let down with the whole setup of all X-Men stories are the same. Now we're going to really do something different. Xavier and Magneto can't keep fighting. They're both going to change their ideology. And then we get a setup that's been done at least 3 or 4 times in previous years in the X-Men. Oh, they created an island utopia paradise where they're all going to get, mutants have their own identity. This is literally the last 10 years of X-Men comics have been this.
Right. That's
so
weird.
I realized I just sounded like I went off a hard cliff of being like, I like this and then ranting about it. But like it's well done, but I did not think it was that profound. And I thought it was actually profoundly anticlimactic by the time it got to the end. I was surprised that was the ending. I kept expecting some kind of twist on the thing. And it was just like, oh, this is just what it is.
Yeah. I thought there was something of a twist at the end. I don't know if I'd call it a twist, but there's a thematic reveal that I actually really liked. And maybe we save that. I'm not sure we want to leap into.
We don't have to jump into that. Yeah.
So I think we should get back to that. Now I've lost my train of thought. But I think.
Well, what I was saying was, for all the bluster about this series, like I did read some interviews with Hickman before the series came out, and I liked everything that he was saying, like him wanting to make the X-Men relevant again, and like big ideas, and I was just kind of let down at how unspectacular I thought it was. Like, really, I mean, they.
Well, I thought, may I throw something out there?
Oh, yeah, hit me.
I totally agree with you that I think it was too long. And
I think that's my biggest criticism. I'm sorry, go on.
I think that was the biggest problem. And it was too long because it's not really a story. And that's okay. Like, the whole thing is set up for what will be the new status quo and Hickman's ongoing. Which, as I understand it, is starting out with a hard focus on Cyclops, so it will get very character-centric.
Sure.
Like, it was all set up. But 12 issues of basically just hyper-dense world building is a lot.
Yeah.
Like,
see, and this gets back to my complaint about it being 2 series that are not really 2 series. I think you could have done a 6-issue series that's all set up. Just do your world building. And I think he probably could have cut out a lot of the Moira McTaggart stuff, even though that was actually the most interesting part, because that's the character stuff, really. Like, that's the story, is Moira's, the revelation of Moira's mutant power and how it operates, which I'll just go, I actually thought that was a great idea. I kind of loved everything about it. I've always thought it was kind of awkward the way some mutants have, like, unworkable powers, like, they're neat ideas, but there's this weird, the X-Men have always kind of existed, the mutants in the Marvel Universe have always kind of had this, like, oh man, like this, I can't think of the suspension of disbelief with its, like, relation to science, because it's like, it's a mutation which causes, some characters to randomly grow
the weather.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's like, like, my body produces spikes, which is a defense mechanism. Okay, that's a mutation. My body allows me to control the weather. And you're getting a little into a gray area
what
there.
What are we actually talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And so like, I've always thought it was kind of weird how you have some characters with just, like, weird powers that don't really line up with the science of what the mutation is. But at the same time, I kind of accept it as just like, you just kind of gloss over that. It's a superhero comic, and this is just the natural world, or I shouldn't say natural. This is the world they've built. You can get kind of weird with it, and you can tell interesting stories. Moira's power is kind of like that. It's like, she's perpetually living in a Groundhog Day.
Yeah. Her powers are Groundhog Day.
Yeah, her powers are Groundhog Day. And, it doesn't make sense, but, I accept it because you can do some interesting things with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes for a compelling setup. And I thought, credit where credit is due. Hickman is a big plotter, big thinker.
Yes.
I thought it was a super clever way to play with continuity.
Oh,
good job, man.
I agree. I was actually going to bring that up. So as much as I'm going to criticize this book, and it will be a lot, all praise is due to Hickman's big idea for getting around continuity. I think that's a great idea. I think it's even better that Marvel's going with it, because it reminds me of a lot of the ideas that Grant Morrison had to solve their DC universe stuff, and DC just kind of shut him down. They're like, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something more confusing, and less fun. And because he had some ideas about like the Speed Force, like Flash, and multiple realities, and like it warps things, when he uses powers, stuff like that. And it's like, okay, there's a lot you can do with that. And I see your camera.
Gosh, I don't know why it's doing that.
I don't know. It's all right. I'll snip that little section out.
All right.
But yeah, so I think Hickman's idea of Moira living through multiple lives, and you can just kind of write it off like, oh, this event happened in this one life, which has been wiped away now that she's restarting now, and it's also a brilliant move that gives him the perfect out to end his run.
Yeah. He can
like
get as
everything
crazy as he wants.
Exactly.
Go along for the ride, and
it's all self-contained. And his run can end with Moira dying and restarting a new X-Men line. You can keep whatever you like. You can throw away whatever you don't like. It's perfect. I actually think it's flawless. Like in the idea of especially within the idea of comic book logic and comic book serialization. Like it's brilliant, and it's perfect to center your story around that. I think that's great. I actually really love it. So it hooked me right away, with that, like that revelation. I was like, okay, I like this. I'm on board. But story was too long. I think I would have almost preferred the setup. Like you said, it's all setup. So I would have preferred like a six issue setup series. And then you can do an ongoing series. You can reveal a lot of this Moira stuff. You can focus on different characters. Like, I thought it was just entirely way too long. It might not have been too long, and I say this sounds kind of weird and maybe unfair. If the issues, this goes back to, it would make sense if it was a two issue series. If they were meant to be read simultaneously, if they were both coming out like the same week, and there was like I don't know, if there was some other layer that could play on the reading order. Like, I was really bothered about the direction of how you're supposed to read this series, because that's like, why is it two series then? Like, if I'm reading it in a specific order.
That's a good point. If you're gonna
because like,
if you're gonna dictate how it's experienced, then why are you who knows, is there like some extra deep switcheroo that we haven't found yet?
Maybe?
Maybe not.
I have a friend who's a big fan of the band Tool, and he tells me, you probably aren't plugged into this at all, but anybody who knows Tool fans, they'll tell you all about the secret listening order for albums. It's like the track list is this, but really, if you decipher the code, you're supposed to listen to it like this, and it's a whole, whatever. I don't care. Maybe that's going on here too. I don't care.
I guess that's the rub. How much do we actually care about that? Like, I believe it was thought out. I believe it was orchestrated, and it's clever.
Yeah.
Like, we're restarting the line. We need to get people talking. We need to kind of attack this thing on multiple levels. We want to give you X-Men stories. We want to encourage fan buzz. We want to encourage speculation. We want to make you read every book because you think you're going to get something from one more thing. Like, it's brilliant. Like, I absolutely believe that Hickman had, an X-Men story, and then they added a few layers of, and how does this become a marketing strategy as well? And it's
effective.
It's effective. Like, it's doing his job.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
But how much do we care?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't help but think back to, and this will be the second of what was probably will be many comparisons to Grant Morrison. I can't help but think back to Grant Morrison's weird crossover series that he did at DC several years ago, Seven Soldiers.
Sure.
Where it was essentially four different 4-issue series of 4 different characters, right? I believe it was 4, right? It was 7. Duh, I don't know why I said that. I'm sorry. It was 7 characters, a 4-issue series.
4-issue series, yes.
Yeah, it was 4 issues. That's where the number 4 was in. Because it was 4 issues of 7 characters. And they never met or crossed over. Mm-hmm. And their series just came out like one, every week. And the reading order was whatever you wanted to read it in. Do you read all of one character, then all of one character, then all of one character? Or do you read the first issue, then the second issue across the board, then the third issues across, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was constructed so that it was self-contained if you just wanted to read a story about these characters. But if you followed through the whole thing, there's a bigger tapestry that's being woven together and a bigger story. And House of X and Powers of X delivered almost nothing like that. None of that at all.
Not that I noticed.
Not that I noticed. And again, maybe I just didn't put in the effort to figure it out. I mean, I did notice that there was a lot of on the design pages, like with the notes of Moira McTaggart and, all the stuff. There's all the different Krakoan language symbols, and they have the lexicon. Yeah. You can go through and decipher that, I guess, if you want. I didn't. So, anybody who disagrees with my criticism, you can just write me off as being lazy for not putting in the work to, find out how awesome it was. But
maybe this book's not for us.
Yeah, but that goes back to my whole thing that I often claim of, just because something makes you work to understand it doesn't mean it's good. It still has to be good beyond the work you put into it.
Sure. I think the Seven Soldiers comparison is interesting because it rewards you if you put in the work. But also, if you just really like Clary and the Witch Boy, you can read that story. And it rewards you for, liking Clary and the Witch Boy.
Yes, exactly.
There were a number of issues in House of X, Powers of X that they gave you some piece of this bigger, century-spanning mega narrative, but they weren't really enjoyable by themselves.
Correct.
They were just like, it's just a bunch of information that I'm going to put together if I keep reading at some point.
Yeah. And that's why I was really like, why this is an interesting thing for me reading this book, because although I said I had to quit reading it halfway through, for a period there, I was really excited reading it issue by issue. I was like, I was getting into it. I can see why people like this. And then at a certain point, it all started to just feel like I was being strung along. Yeah. And I needed to just quit and take the whole thing, in one piece. And when I did that, I found myself profoundly underwhelmed. Yeah. Just like it does feel like something that's meant to be read serialized, issue to issue. And you kind of just it has all the ups and downs that you want in an issue, but it's not a complete story. It's not a complete piece of fiction.
Right.
And this is why we keep making comparisons to Lost and stuff. It's that thing of, there's all these information drops that make you wonder what's going to happen next. And then at a certain point you realize everything is just designed to make you wonder what's going to happen next. There is no next though.
Right. Or it's a setup for a future story that is clearly a contrived means of creating a future story.
Correct. Yes.
And I read a few interviews with Hickman where people were basically calling him out with kind of, nerdy fan questions like, well, if Wolverine died and he came back, why doesn't he have why is his adamantium still there? And and Hickman basically said, well, if we're going to ask that, and we can do all these things, why are any of these characters coming back that way if we have the ability to manipulate them? And basically what he said was, that sounds like storytelling potential to me. I'm not giving you an answer right now. But,
sure, yeah.
I will build on these things because there's stuff to mine there. Which, I get that. But also, if you're writing a story about people, which I guess you could argue that's not what this was meant to be. This was supposed to be set up.
Right. It's all set up.
But if you're writing a story about people, these are the first questions people would ask.
Uh-huh.
I mean, a big one that grated on me, call me out here if this is too nitpicky.
Yeah.
Professor X and Magneto get together. They decide they're going to do something different that they've never done before, despite the fact that they've sort of done it before. But they've never done it before.
Right.
And they're going to change the world by creating a unified mutant nation. And the first thing they do is invite every mutant, including every genocidal villain they've ever faced, to join them.
Yeah.
Right? And that's like, wow, big crazy setup. There's a ton of story potential there. But don't you think, just as a person who reads stories and loves these characters, if you invite the guy who's tried to murder the world multiple times and everyone you've loved multiple times to come hang out, that someone's going to be like, let's talk about this.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And why would the person just be like, you know what? I did try to murder everyone over and over for, thousands of years, but I'm going to join you this time. Like, to say, well, those are future stories to tell seems like a cop-out.
So there are like 3 avenues of thought that this is taking me down, which I want to try and identify them really quickly, and then we can go on. Number one, yes, that was actually a big problem I had for me. It's a fine, interesting idea. This whole, like, we're going to create a mutant nation, and it's a new slate. All sins are forgiven. Come to this island, and we're going to start over because mutants need to be together. Fine. There's like several problems with that. First problem I had with this story and the way it presented that was it didn't show any sort of conflict whatsoever. Like, it really bothered me that not a single character, I think maybe Wolverine raised an eyebrow. He's like, Apocalypse?
Yeah, he made some sort of like snide comment at Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Which would be on par with, like, I don't know, General Patton like making a jokey comment with Hitler when they arrive him to like come hang out in the United States.
Exactly. Like I'm sorry. Like this and this is the problem. This is the problem with this story as a story, not as world building setup, but as a story, is that it doesn't show any of the conflict that any of the characters would /should / I assume would be going through with this. Like, number one, it's like all humans are against it, sort of. Like, where are all the humans that are like helping the mutants? You know what I mean? Where do they fit into this story? Well, they're just not there. We'll deal with it later. Where are all the mutants that are disagreeing with Charles Xavier's bold new plan? Well, they just agree with Charles. Like, it's too much hand waving of just saying, like, we'll deal with that later. We just need to get this setup out of the way.
Right.
Okay, so so like that bothers me. It just feels, frankly, this goes back to like it. I don't want to call it lazy writing because I don't think it's lazy. I think it's just dismissive. Like, it's just we just don't want to. Right. That's not what this story is about, which is fine, I guess. But then that's my criticism. It's not a good story if you're just deciding not to address this.
Right.
So then number two,
it requires readers buy into that and are like, okay, I'm trusting you, and not like
exactly this.
What would characters written as humans in a story that has arcs and meaning?
Correct. Yeah. This is me showing off my extreme cynicism when it comes to evaluating written stories, because I mean, I remember the first time it happened to me reading a comic book. I was on a message board and people were arguing about a character doing a thing, and it was like people were kind of coming up with justifications. Well, he might do it for this, or he might do it for. And then at a certain point, I just thought maybe it's just bad writing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe it's just like, there is no reason. It's other than just it was poorly done. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of in that spot. Like, I did not like that was not addressed or not adequately addressed. Like, like I actually didn't really like Cyclops too much. I kind of thought I would. Initially I did, but his whole like just total trust in Xavier, which this is a whole other section that we're going to talk about Xavier, I'm sure. But I want to continue with my three avenues of thought. So there's that. It's not addressed. Number two, all the mutants are welcome. It's a new slate. And then we're going to create the rules of Genova, the laws of Genova. And if you break them, then you're in trouble.
Krakoa.
So, what?
The laws of Krakoa.
Did I say Genova?
Yes.
The laws of Krakoa.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have Krakoa. It's our mutant utopia. And we're going to create the laws. And if you break them, then you're in trouble. So all you bad villains, we're giving you a mulligan on all your past problems, but now there's laws, so you got to obey them. Okay, so then we have the scene with Sabretooth.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say, there was some logical problems I had with that scene.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit, maybe I am displaying my American arrogance here, but they punished Sabretooth for a crime he committed before the law existed.
Mm-hmm.
That goes against American ideology. That goes against everything that the foundational philosophers of this country came up with. You cannot be guilty of a crime committed before it is decided that it's a crime. So my problem with that scene is they decide, well, Sabretooth, you killed a bunch of people. You shouldn't have done that. That's the highest crime we have decided now in Krakoa, killing people. And Magneto there's the one line of Magneto saying, I told you not to do that, and you did it anyway. So now we're exiling you to the worst punishment. Okay, so what about all the other people sitting around that table who previously killed people?
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
People.
Come on. I mean, come on.
Right. Right. No, it doesn't feel, to keep making a lost comparison, it feels like it's all done in service to the writer's bigger vision, but it's not done in like and this is how things would proceed. And this is like, you just have to accept it. And
right.
It's fine to an extent because it's kind of consistent in its pacing and what it asks you to accept.
It's consistent in its story beats. Like this is where this type of thing happens, but there's a broken internal logic.
Yes. Which the fact that it's consistent makes me say, yes, this is intentional, and yes, this was very well thought out, and yes, I do believe Hickman is a very smart man and a thoughtful plotter and can be a very good writer.
Right.
But that doesn't mean it's working for me.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of my thought. Yeah.
It's a weird, like, these things are happening and it's compelling enough and it's consistent enough that I want to know what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also letting go of all these other things that are kind of, I want to have my cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I mean, the fact that there are enough compelling ideas thrown out in the course of this that I want to know what's going to happen is saying something, and that for the past 15 years, the X-Men have not been able to do this. And the fact that, like, even with, like, the mutant nation of Krakoa being kind of a retread of something we've seen, like, 3 times in the past decade.
Right.
This is more compelling than every one of those other times.
Yeah.
Those were largely garbage stories that went nowhere and were never particularly convincing.
Mm-hmm.
So it would seem that Hickman's bringing enough intellectual heft to the table that I'm like, well, I kind of want to know where you're going with this. You're putting something out there. But again, just returning to, but as a story about humans,
right,
there's something missing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's the weird. That's what makes me feel so weird about this book. Because, like, I don't hate it, but, like, when I think about it, I can't help but just have problems with all these little things. And this is where people would say that I'm a nitpicker. Yeah. I am.
Those nitpicky critics.
Can you believe it? I didn't think that Todd Glass, whoever that directed the Joker movie, it wasn't the greatest superhero movie of all time. I'm a nitpicking hater, like same thing with this book. Like you said, I appreciate I will say both the skill and the thoughtfulness that is brought to this book.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, as much as I will kind of criticize Hickman for having a really dry clinical tone, I kind of like it. Just in terms of it works for the types of stories that he wants to tell, but it's one of those things that's like it works in his favor, but it also works against him. I actually would say it's very similar to Brian Michael Bendis. Like, his greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. Like, the thing that everybody loves him for is the same thing that other people hate him for.
Right. Right.
I think Hickman's got a little bit of that going on for him. So
I think that's true.
Yeah.
And I think maybe part of why it's been received as well as it has is because relative to what's come before, I don't just mean like what's come before has been bad, but it's a clear change in tone, and that's refreshing.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
Like maybe it is somewhat dry and clinical sometimes, but when Hickman talks about like nations bickering with Magneto over the nature of the deal that's being cut on an international level, Hickman talks about those things like someone who maybe thinks a little bit about big picture problems and economics and data and numbers. And basically he talks about things like a grown-up who's interested in science fiction.
Yes.
As opposed to, I'm just going to say it, a lot of the X-Men for the past 5-10 years where they've been using child phone speak and pithy nods to bullshit from the news to sound relevant without actually offering anything thoughtful.
I 100% agree. I'm going to avoid just bashing the previous X-Men books. First of all, because I'll cop. I haven't really read a lot of them. I have read some though, and I think on the whole they have just been pretty miserable. I'm not saying all bad. I would never say that because first of all I haven't read all of them, and second of all there's actually some that I'm interested in reading that I just haven't gotten around to.
Sure.
But my biggest criticism of the X-Men books prior to Hickman's kind of soft reboot actually has been more editorial. Like it just feels like it's been directionless. Basically, ever since the No More Mutants thing from House of M, is that what it was called? From oh my god, by Brian Michael Bendis' series. Ever since the No More Mutants, I think the X-Men line has been in kind of just like a chaotic free fall, and there's not been any visionary direction of what the book should be, what the books should be, what they should do with them, like what their purpose is. They've just kind of been bouncing back and forth between lame crossover ideas and I try to be diplomatic about this. Lazy. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the writing in a lot of the books. Like just childish. I'll say a childish perspective of the world around you.
Sure.
Which, like as you said, buzzwords ripped out of news headlines.
Right. Which was what I was. Maybe these are superhero comics and childishness is okay, but at the same time, if you're going to roll with the central conceit of the X-Men, which is that they're a little more compelling because they're a little more based in real world problems, then maybe give those real world problems their due and don't just throw out. Not saying all the stories in previous books have been bad, and not saying that the writers haven't tried their best amidst probably incredible editorial pressure.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to pull those things in there and you don't knock them out of the park, it comes across as...
I agree. Yeah. So all that being said, we kind of awkwardly touched on that. As much as I'm going to criticize Jonathan Hickman's series, it does feel like finally the X-Men is being written by an adult.
I feel that, yes.
It really does. Like, as much as I will complain about so many logical inconsistencies with what he's doing, but it does at least feel like an adult who kind of has a deeper understanding of the world and like you said, an interest in sci-fi and big ideas. And I am still comforted by that. As underwhelmed as I was by this series and as anticlimactic as I thought it was, I'm still very, very comforted by the fact that this does feel like finally, the X-Men are kind of getting their due, which I guess, people that my friends who joke about how I hate everything will laugh and say that that's like the greatest praise I've ever given something. Like, I don't like it, but at least it's, pretty good. And at least they're trying. and like my friend Tim is going to be like, wow, it must be great. So like I can see how people are responding so strongly to this series. Like I'm a cynical jerk, so I'm gonna pick out all these little things that I think like don't make sense. But I can see why people are reacting to this and saying like, finally, a book that takes this seriously. Even if it's not necessarily to my liking, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, and not to keep going big picture, whatever. This is this is what we do. This is your podcast. We ramble, and like 3 people watch it. So you know what?
Exactly.
I'm talking about what I feel like talking about.
I'm not worried about offending viewers. We don't have any.
Whatever. I'm just gonna say things. We're bringing our nitpicks, we're bringing our thoughts on like the greater aims of writing, and we're being critical. But that doesn't mean that like this has no merit. Like,
the things that have no merit are the things that we haven't talked about on this podcast.
Right.
What we haven't talked about on this podcast? The last 15 years of X-Men comics.
Right. We're here talking about this, which actually means we're kind of into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's something to talk about.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself is like, I mean, that's something.
That's something. It is. And maybe it feels a little desperate, like we're grasping at straws, but I agree that is something.
No, it's a big deal, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we live in an age of Twitter criticism and Metacritic criticism where people want a one-liner and a number attached to it.
Yes, and, exactly.
We've playfully done, Magneto helmets or, whatever, like 3 out of 4. But
yeah,
let's not do that today.
No,
that's not what this is about.
It's not. I don't think I even could, honestly. I'm all over the place on this series.
I'm not going to give you a 7.8. Could have used more of this. I'm just going to say there are things that I liked a lot and things I didn't like, and the things I didn't like we're going to talk about for a while. But also, it's pretty interesting. So,
I agree.
I don't know. You figure out your freaking internet number that you need to attach.
Right. I agree. So on that note, in the spirit of that, let's talk about the characterization of Charles Xavier in the series. Because I'll tell you right up front right now, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'll get this out of the way. I am sick of Charles Xavier having a secret past where he did something wrong and he's actually not as good as everybody thinks he is.
Sure.
Like, I'm sick of that characterization that has been kind of the go-to for him for the last, I don't know, forever. Even Morrison's run had that element to it. He killed Cassandra Nova in the womb. He strangled her to death. So there was always been that, like, oh, Xavier's not as good as he appears. It's all, nobody is good. Nothing is black and white. It's all tones of gray, like that profound idea, that profound revelation that comes to every 14-year-old the first time he reads Nietzsche and rejects the Catholic Church. And so I'm kind of sick of that being a go-to for Xavier. Like Whedon had the great story where the Danger Room AI became sentient and Xavier had it locked up or something, and it's like why? For the greater good, I guess. Then there's like Brubaker did that story about the Krakoa Island and the Third Summers brother, and I don't even remember that.
All those other dead X-Men.
Yeah, exactly. The other dead X-Men that got sent there, and Xavier wiped all their memories, and
horrible.
I'm so sick of Xavier not being as good as you think and actually being kind of bad, and then all these bad guys are, maybe we should sympathize with them a little bit. I'm sick of that. We've had, like, even before people started doing the Xavier might not be as good as you think, we've been dealing with sympathizing towards villains. Like, Magneto's gone back and forth. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, we read the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby comics, and we talked about them for a year. The podcast exists. So we know about, like, how the original, like, Magneto was portrayed as just like a total what did Grant Morrison call him? Like a terrorist twat? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Claremont came in and kind of gave him a little bit of motivation, a humanity, like, he was a victim of the Nazis, he was in the Holocaust. It's like, you can see how that would radicalize somebody. It's like, okay, yeah, we do. And then he had his redemption arc where there was a time where Magneto was even leading the school after Xavier died, like the first of the 5 times that he's died. And it's like, okay, so we can see how that works, but that's what I'm getting at. It's like we always have this, like, for villains, there's always this thing of like, we sort of understand their motivations, and maybe there's a little bit of a redemption, and they're not as evil as we think. And I'm so sick of heroes constantly getting tarnished or not being as good as we think. I'm not saying that story shouldn't exist. That's an important archetype. When we're talking about greater archetypes of stories now, I think that the morality of tough decisions that need to be made, like what is a hero, so on and so on. Sure, that's valuable, but I don't think that every good guy needs to have a secret genocidal past. That's all I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Which a little hyperbole there.
It was a little hyperbole, but
I agree though that the desire to darken Xavier, I'm not opposed to showing complexity in characters, even characters that you think are like the moral exemplars. But the few attempts that we just mentioned, none of them were very good.
No, they were terrible.
Like saying that Xavier connected with a sentient AI and then hid it away because he just had to train his students is just kind of a bad story.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It's just not a good story.
It's not.
Like, does that even make sense? Like, I don't know. Like,
and I think that this comes from a problem of people not understanding character, maybe. And if I were the type of person who would take this further, I would say this is a lack of central morality in the creators themselves. I'm not going that far.
Savage.
But no, I think it's not like Xavier was without his flaws. I think Xavier's flaws was that he was naive, and that is a flaw. The idea that he was a good guy and he was just really naive. He believed in everybody, and I think that is a flaw. And you shouldn't be so naive as to just believe that everything can be good and everything can work out.
But okay, so wasn't that in particular? Wasn't that kind of Hickman's point? I mean, in terms of darkening, like,
okay,
there's a lot we could talk about here, but ultimately,
you're absolutely right.
Like,
no, I agree. That is Hickman. Well, no, you're right. You're right to point that out. That is kind of what Hickman draws on. Like, the way he portrays Xavier is, that is his flaw. He's naive. He believes that he can just appeal to his human brothers and everything will work out.
Basically, Moira resolves to break Xavier.
Yeah.
And you get that in her journals, and you get that in the confrontation at the fair where she's like, "You never change. That's not a compliment."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I feel like Hickman was bringing a little more to that.
No, I agree. What I was saying wasn't like what I'm saying about I don't like the darkening of Xavier. That wasn't a specific criticism of Hickman's Xavier. I actually think that Hickman has brought a complexity to Xavier that has been long overdue. No, you're right. But that being said, I still am not sure how I feel about Hickman's Xavier. Mostly because this whole thing of like Moira resolves to break Xavier, and Xavier realizes that they have to have a path, like a new path forward, And this kind of ties in with a lot of my complaints before of like the ultimate third way, as it were. Doesn't feel that profound or new or different than anything he's tried before. And that's what confused me.
Yes. Yes, it's almost. And here's where I'm like, did I just not read this that well?
Yeah,
This
right.
third way, we're trying something that's never been tried. I kind of feel like it was never actually explained what they were trying.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's like it's implied that the third way is we're starting an island where everyone is welcome and everyone is going to work together toward something. But I kind of feel like maybe that was a red herring. Like
I'd be willing to accept that, you know, because you're right. That's very possible. But then this gets back into my like all the stuff we were saying earlier about serialized fiction and just like setting up things that will solve later without having to decide how it's going to be solved.
Sure.
I think that stories can't just be nothing but wheel spinning and red herrings. Like you've got to have some kind of substance to grasp onto. You know, I need a little protein.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. There was never. I like that. I like that a lot. In the course of the book, it was all set up. There was not really a central character, and there was never like what was the crucible that was going to like what makes a good story? A character has an arc. They're pulled through something where there is a moral conundrum, and they work through it toward change or realization or growth. Right? I mean, call me out if you have a better way to word this.
No, I think that's right.
I don't know. Like I came away from the entire setup unsure of who's good, who's bad, who like. Not even that, like, because I actually read another interview with Hickman where he said something like, maybe it's okay. Like people are wondering, are the X-Men the good guys or not? And I'm okay with you wondering that. But part of me is like, okay, that's fine. Like we can pose this mystery about the bigger mission of what's happening. I actually think that's compelling. But where was our Kitty Pryde character?
Yeah, exactly.
Where was our character who like provides an entry point and a relatable morality that basically says, I'm questioning this too.
Yeah. That's
12 issues actually, you didn't get it.
Yeah, that's basically my total criticism of this book. And I think a lot of people will say that they don't care about that. Like they just like all the big picture stuff. And if my problem with the book is that there was no central character to relay that the information of how the story operates to the reader, then maybe I'm just not smart enough to get it, because you know smart people don't need main characters to understand the morality going on, which I think that ridiculous, but I'm sure that's what people would say.
Well, it gets into a big philosophical question of what is the point of writing.
Exactly.
Like, are you trying to say something, or are you just trying to titillate me?
Exactly. Are you just trying to string me along, or is this about something? Is this a story? You know. This goes back to my whole my biggest criticism is that it didn't have a central character.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. It could have really used one.
Yeah.
Because we haven't even talked about any of the events in the book, you know, like the things that happen, because I don't it's all fine, it's all exciting, but like I said, at the end of the day, it's there's nothing to hang your hat on. You know what I mean? Like there's no resonance with the human experience. And this is one scene that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to get your opinion on this, because this actually was the scene that I saw people showing panels on Facebook the most, when this issue came out. The famous Wolverine Nightcrawler death scene. Right? When it's their mission, they have to stop the mother mold, and there's no way to do it other than they're in space surrounding the sun, and Nightcrawler has to teleport him and Wolverine out into the vacuum of space so Wolverine can cut it up and break it free from its thing to kill it, essentially, and then they will die in the process. And you get that great dramatic scene where they're are we really going to do this? You know, and Nightcrawler's well, Cyclops is it has to be done, so it will be done. And Wolverine kind of asks Nightcrawler, you believe in stuff on the other side? Nightcrawler kind of gives him the stuff, and Wolverine's I just don't know what to expect for a guy like me. And Nightcrawler, is well, when you get to the other side, look for me. I'll be waiting, radiant and glorious. It's very nice. It's very emotional. Then they do it. Nightcrawler instantly burns up, and then Wolverine dies while he's slicing open the thing, and then Cyclops like practically shedding a tear says, "Bravest man I know," and then it's a suicide mission, and then they all die.
Yeah.
It's like what a great dramatic scene. Totally unearned. Completely unearned.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It means nothing. It means nothing. Because then several issues later, the characters come back to life. Now, did they know they were going to come back to life? I don't know. It's not explicitly stated whether they knew Xavier had the ability to bring people back to life. So maybe they didn't know they were coming back, and they went on a suicide mission, and then, you know, they're just so great, that's how they act. But Xavier knew that they were coming back. Like, they had that exchange beforehand where they're like, well, if you do this, you'll live forever. And there was, like, an implication. The red herring was, like, Magneto says something like, martyrs, you know, and nobody forgets the founder of a nation, you know. And there's this whole thing of like, oh, it's all ideological. Like, you're going to go on a suicide mission, and then history will remember Cyclops and Wolverine and Nightcrawler as being, you know, their great sacrifice. The same way that we remember, you know, what's his name and who's it's from Rome, and you know, all those guys' names that I can't remember. That's a joke. But then they come back. Okay, I think that scene was unearned. It's a nice scene, but it didn't mean anything. It was a thing that happened, and you care about it because you care about the characters. But even at the time when that scene was happening in the book, we didn't know what, quote unquote, like reality this was taking place in. Like when the characters died, I saw some people react with like, wow, I can't believe Hickman is killing off these characters so early in his run.
Right.
And I'm thinking, like, really? Like, we're dealing with, like, 4 parallel realities all at the same time here. And I was, like, blown that people were drawn in by that. Not, I mean...
It's a strange... It makes me feel really old, Aaron.
It makes me feel old.
I feel like the oldest, dumbest man. Maybe I am.
Yeah.
It felt... and maybe this is a testament to Hickman's skill.
Yeah.
It very well may be. I'm just not sure I agree with it. I don't know. It feels very 21st century. We digest everything in little snippets, and we have short attention spans. So give me all the hits, and let's keep moving.
Exactly.
And I care because I'm told I'm supposed to care. And the music's loud, and the explosions are big, and oh my gosh, they're crying, and then we're on the next thing.
Yeah.
But is that actually a story?
Right.
I mean,
because I'll argue that it's not.
Right. But I would argue that I think Hickman's very clever in that he's playing to that. Like, he's weaving a tapestry of these things with this 12 life, you know, chart to create something that is compelling to an audience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really easy to be cynical about. Really easy to be cynical about.
I can't help but be cynical about it. It's my problem.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Like, I hear you. Like, I thought that scene was very well written. It's weird. It weirds me out when people are like, I'm crying over this.
Yeah.
I mean, the only reason they're crying is because they've loved the characters for 30 years.
Exactly. And they're imagining that this would be the best end for these characters. What a great end for Wolverine and Nightcrawler.
Right. But even within the context of the story, it's meaningless.
It's meaningless. In the context of the story, it's not their end. Right. And it's like, we don't even know if they think that it's their end.
Right.
You know, like the whole conversation, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Right. Which brings my head back to your question about Xavier's characterization. We haven't seen his face yet, which is...
I was actually thinking about that on my second read through. I was going through it, and I was like, man, we never see Xavier's face. That's got to be a thing. Like, that means something. It's a visual art, right? Yeah. He's always wearing his helmet, and the few times he's not wearing his helmet, his back is turned to the reader, or he's in shadow.
Yeah. Not that I think like, oh, it's going to turn out that it's actually so-and-so in disguise.
Right, no.
It's clearly an artistic cue.
It's an artistic decision for a theme. You know, is that we never see his face. I agree. So I've been thinking about that a lot.
Right. So then that opens the question, is this even Xavier? Is this even our reality?
Right.
Is this even, like, it's a lot of interesting questions, but there's got to be something to ground it. And I guess maybe he's going to do that with Cyclops because he said Cyclops is going to be his point of view character.
But
it doesn't happen in these 12 issues.
Right. And I wish it would have happened in these 12 issues. That's my biggest criticism. I guess this sounds like almost like a backhanded compliment or faint praise, but it's like my biggest problem with this is there's so many good ideas here, and there's a lot of really well-written stuff and well illustrated. We haven't talked about the art at all, but there's a lot of really great ideas. It's well written, and I feel like it not only could be so much better, but it could be so much more functional if it just had more like a main character. Like I think more people would be getting it, like something to revolve around. I like Cyclops, like would have been a great character to kind of be your point of view of how, he watches this change in Xavier and, how he comes to believe him and how he doesn't know, you know what I mean? Because that's basically been his whole character for the entirety of the character's existence. Is he's Xavier's number one student, and he always struggles with, living up to Xavier's dream and Xavier's expectations. And like, he's a really great point of view character for the type of story that Hickman's trying to tell. And it really bothers me that he's like barely in it.
Right. Which, So, like, was this entire 12-issue thing just meant to create these kind of conversations? What we're doing right now.
And the thing is like, it's not unsuccessful if that was the point. Like, again.
Yeah, I don't know.
I just hate getting sucked into something and feeling like I've been rooked.
Yeah.
Like I've been tricked.
Yeah, I mean, I think I told you my pastor loves the X-Men, and he's been very excited about this series, and we love talking about it. And he was actually pretty fired up after the Death issue. He was like,
sure.
It's like, I thought it was very, very well written. Like, he got the characters. But he, the 12 issues wrapped up, and he said, like, I've been excited to care about the X-Men. I haven't basically read them since Claremont, other than checking in on things here and there. But is this all just a ploy to get me to read 7 books a month? Like,
so that's actually like kind of my problem. When I heard the news about they're canceling the X-Men line and it's just going to be Jonathan Hickman's book, I admittedly, I naively and somewhat stupidly thought, like, wow, oh my God, they're just going down to 1 X-Men book a month. This is huge. And then, like, later I found out, I was like, oh, they're just doing that for a few months while they do their setup series. Then we get 7 ongoing series. Oh God.
And since those announcements, they've announced that Hickman's taking on like 2 or 3 more books.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I don't know all the details of that, but like it's very clearly become like, oh yeah, okay, I see what's happening
Yeah,
here.
exactly. I get it. Yeah, and that's kind of even when this is number 3 or 4 Grant Morrison reference. Even when Marvel did their big reboot for Grant Morrison, and they did, Morrison did the new X-Men. How many other X-Men books were there at the time? There was Joe Casey's book and Chris Claremont's book, Extreme X-Men.
And like X-Statix. There was
X-Statix, yeah. But they weren't all like under the umbrella of the reboot. Like there was just like some you cannot. X-Statix was its own thing. You know what I mean? Like
basically out of continuity.
Yeah, it's basically out of continuity, which we still need to talk about someday because I love that book with an undying passion.
Sure.
But yeah, my point is, like, there was like maybe 3 X-Men books at the time that were kind of under the umbrella of the new brand. Like Joe Casey's books and Claremont's Extreme X, but they all had the same uniforms, and it was like, existing in the same continuity. And anything else was like fringe stuff or miniseries. And what is this now? They're doing like 7 books.
It sounds about right. I don't know.
Outrageous.
And I don't know. In fairness, like if we compare this to the Morrison time. Morrison's story was very focused in Morrison's book. And the other books were kind of parallel, but they weren't really orchestrated in a big way, for better or worse. So they kind of grabbed little bits from it, but really you could just read Morrison's story.
Yes.
and enjoy Morrison's story. It's possible that, Hickman is writing the flagship X-Men book. And if you read the flagship X-Men book, they're trying to recreate that. And that's where the main plot thing will be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's also possible there'll be crossovers in 6 months. I don't know. If we go by the last 10 years, there will be crossovers.
This is where we talk about the ill will that I have toward Marvel. Like, I don't want to start buying a book and then being told that I got to buy 5 other books. Mm-hmm. This has been a perpetual problem throughout my entire life with Marvel Comics. Mm-hmm. And I hate it. And it's to the point where I'd rather not read a book for fear that might happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I just get dragged into this over and over.
Yeah. Fool me once. Yeah. Shame on you. Fool me 8 or more times. Shame on me.
I can't help myself. I hear you. Yeah. Can I jump ahead and talk about what I thought was one of the bigger sci-fi themes?
Oh, absolutely.
What your thoughts were?
Hit me.
So I'm curious what you thought about, I don't know if I would call it a reveal, mm-hmm. but so Hickman's structure is, not only do we have multiple realities, we also have jumping back and forth in time.
Yes.
Which he's going for it. There's density here.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this constant hopping forward to this 10,000 years in the future, mm-hmm. where it's referred to as the Ascension. And honestly, for most of the book, I thought it was boring and stupid, and I didn't care about it.
Agreed.
I didn't think it was stupid. It just wasn't engaging. It was just something that was there. At the end of the book, he does pull Moira and the X-Men into that, and he kind of gives a mission statement for where things are going. He's still kind of obtuse about it. But I can restate that specifically, what I thought of it, but I'm curious, when that all came together at the end, they're 10,000 years in the future, and the Blue Librarian has a talk with Moira and Wolverine. It's kind of like, okay, this is kind of why this whole thread even existed.
Right.
How'd you feel about that?
Well, I might be confessing kind of my nihilistic attitude toward life, but I was like, I thought that was a good, let me back up. For the story, I thought that was a great twist.
Okay.
That the librarian was a human, post-human, and that their little environment zoo had mutants in it. Because previously it had been set up and it was kind of, it was implied, or the reader was led to assume that it was humans in there. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's good. Like, that was a good story structure. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And that kind of led to the whole, the ultimate revelation of mutants always lose, humans always win, which is an interesting angle to take. Mm-hmm. But as far as what the story was itself, was, the mutants lose, the humans eventually want to just get absorbed into the phalanx, and the librarian can't decide if that's good or bad, so he's going to put things in motion so that it happens, but then also kind of allow Moira to know about it so she can decide to stop it if she wants. I really was kind of checked out of that. Like, 10,000 years,
kind of tired.
I'm like,
there are too many things in the air.
I'm like, so far into the future, who cares if humans get sucked into the phalanx? Like, is that good or bad? You know what I mean? Like, it's set up. There isn't a proper explanation for why anybody would be against that. Like, or like why anybody would be for it even. It's just like a thing that happens. And I guess we're just supposed to accept that it's bad because the Phalanx is a character that has existed in the X-Men before, and they're a bad guy, like classification bad guy. Like, we've seen them, I have a comic book where Gambit fights the Phalanx. So Phalanx bad. But in the context of this story, I was like, why? Like, what's the point? Okay, the next stage of humanity is that they get absorbed into the Phalanx.
Yeah.
What do the mutants care? Like at that point, it's like Moira had to stay alive to kind of determine what humanity's end goal was.
Yeah.
And it was so that they could get sucked into the fan. But none of the humans know that. Like,
Yeah.
I thought it was. It's a nice idea. Like it's an interesting big sci-fi concept idea, but if the mutants just became the dominant species on Earth, wouldn't they just want to get sucked up into the phalanx, or would they not for some reason?
I don't know. Okay, so can I kind of restate what I took from it?
Yes, because I admit I was kind of checked out by that point. I was like, okay, I get it, whatever, but I didn't care either way.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess this is verbal processing here because I haven't talked
totally. That's what I've been doing.
I've been wanting to like get more thoughts on the ending. Did it work for you? You kind of have this setup going into the book that the mutants are at war with the humans are at war with the mutants, and this sort of side piece to that is the humans wage a war against the mutants with the help of technology.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that going into it, I was just like, yeah, fine, whatever. Like technology. Okay. As you get to the end of the book, though, I think it raises. I thought this was a very, I don't know. I thought there was maybe some teeth to this idea, where you're getting into some bigger questions about the nature of technology and humanity. Namely, that humans use technology to master their environment, right? We make a wheel, we make a stick, and that gets more and more advanced to a point where technology and humans meet. Yeah. And when technology and humans meet, like at that point, you're going toward the singularity where everything is happening at once, which is kind of what he uses the phalanx as, is this delivery vessel to this sort of mass consciousness that exists outside time. Right. Which is, getting really trippy.
Godhead. The phalanx Godhead, they even called it.
Right.
Yeah.
But that being sort of an interesting amalgam of what is the end goal of man's use of technology. Like you could tell that story with no X-Men. That's just an interesting, if we put our brains in computers and computers continue to evolve, and then we can fit everything on a hyperdense piece of star material and send it into space is like all of, human sentience contained in the speck or something. This is
an age-old sci-fi concept. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that Hickman pulls mutants into that is, for a long time, the conceit is that mutants are the next step of human evolution.
Right.
But the twist is, well, sure, in a chaotic world where humans have no control. But if humans can master all things via technology, humans dictate evolution. So mutants are a bump in the road. They're not actually, because mutants are always adjusting to environment.
Right.
And if man controls environment via technology, mutants are kind of irrelevant, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know where that goes, but I thought it was an interesting setup because, and I don't know why it took more than 10,000 years to reach this conclusion.
Yeah.
But that was a little like, whatever.
That was part of my thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But is the setup here that the mutants basically is what they're actually going to be doing differently, they're terraforming the Earth. They're changing the Earth such that they're trying to pull technology out of the equation.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well, that was the implication I got, because like their whole thing, like the whole X-Men mission was that they had to stop the mother mold because that's the thing that creates Nimrods. So they needed to stop, or that's the thing that leads to the creation of Nimrods or something. That was the implication. But then also the whole thing of Xavier releasing the drugs, the Krakoan drugs to humans to get them more reliant on mutant biological things rather than technology. Like don't, stop trying to develop a cure for cancer. We've already got one. It grows on Krakoa. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So I understand that, but that's a good angle to take. Like, I agree. So with what you were saying, I liked Hickman's analyzing and breaking down of this idea of like, what does it mean with humans and mutants, and what are mutants in the grand scheme of things? Because I've actually always thought that that's always been kind of a rough spot in the X-Men mythology is the whole humans versus mutants angle. As like, what is it? You know, like you said, for the longest time, it's just sort of been considered the next line of evolution. And even Grant Morrison even used it in the beginning of his issue with Cassandra Nova showing off how Homo sapiens killed Cro-Magnon. But the problem with that, and this is actually wrong, I'll criticize Grant Morrison on this, is that Homo sapiens were not the next step of evolution to Cro-Magnon. They evolved side by side and were cohabiting species. They weren't like Homo sapiens didn't just show up one day from a bunch of Cro-Magnon babies. Like they were both existed at the same time in different areas. They were just like different strains of the evolutionary line, essentially. And Homo sapiens won out. The Darwinian response would be Homo sapiens won out because they were more capable than the Cro-Magnons. They were the idea. I think the idea. I could be wrong. I'm not an archaeologist or a historian or a whatever. Evolutionary psychologist. There's all kinds of different fields of study about this. But Homo sapiens had better tools. Like they were better at crafting tools, which allowed them to get the upper hand on Cro-Magnon. That's the idea essentially, and that would line up with the whole mutants versus humans things. And this is something that this is an idea that I've always thought would work well with humans versus mutants. Is that the reason humans would always have the edge, not an edge, but the reason they could always deal with mutants is that humans are just better at crafting. Which this is the whole technology thing. Like humans are limited in their ability, so they are constantly being tested and constantly forced to come up with a solution. Whereas mutants, you would have a society or a group of people that had an unfair advantage, which would mean they would kind of get lazy, essentially, to put it, quote, in simpler terms, of like in order to get to do things. So they wouldn't have to come up with like if you had just have a bunch of mutants who can fly around, they wouldn't have to come up with jet travel. You know what I mean? Which would then lead to next steps. So there's this idea that this is kind of I appreciate that Hickman is going there, as it were. This, how mutants and humans kind of relate. And again, I think this could have been developed more, maybe through some character development of somebody, but it's just all kind of stated the way Hickman writes. But I guess what I'm getting at is I think that these are good ideas, and I think that this is appropriate for the X-Men. And I don't know. I like it, but kind of like what I said at the beginning, I was kind of checked out by the time it gets to the whole phalanx thing. It's like it's the end of the world. Well, so like, what does that mean? Like, what would mutants do differently? Like
sure, yeah. It doesn't mind any sort of ethical.
Yeah, it doesn't
ethical consideration, which I wonder how intentional that is too, because I feel like maybe a lot of recent misfires in the X-Men have been an attempt to do that, and it comes across as childish.
Yeah, overly, yeah.
It comes across as propaganda. It comes across as platitudes that look good on Hallmark card kind of things.
Yeah, totally.
And maybe Hickman's deliberately avoiding that to create, conversation and intrigue such that you're kind of waiting to see what happens. But I still wish that there was a little more of like something a little more human, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't mean this as a pun with the human mutant thing.
Right.
I just wish there was some more humanity to latch onto within this story.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I trust Hickman, I guess is what I'm saying.
I have a problem with trust in general. Like, there's like we're not going down that road. You're not my psychologist, but especially when it comes to Marvel Comics, I am very jilted.
Yeah. There's complexity that like trusting editorial, trusting the big company, trusting like I don't need a writer to affirm my beliefs by any means.
Right.
I need to feel like there is something intentional here, and I'm not just being manipulated.
Yeah, I agree. and maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm just too cynical to enjoy Hickman's book. Maybe
we're too old.
Maybe I'm too old. Maybe his ongoing series. Yeah. Maybe he'll address all this stuff in his ongoing series, and this was all just set up. But I don't know. It's hard. It's
hard.
Hard. It's hard to put my faith in that.
I should just go read Shakespeare plays or something.
Yes, exactly. Right? Yes.
Yeah. I don't know.
So I don't know. Like I don't want to belabor a point, but you made a good point. I do like that. Hickman's humans versus mutants angle, like the whole, like he's bringing some really good ideas to it, some big ideas to it too, you know. So I guess what I'm starting to say is, like, I am curious to see where this is going to go. Mm-hmm. I don't want to have to feel like I need to invest in a bunch of other nonsense, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. That's so I had my wife read this comic.
Oh, really? Did Taryn like it?
Taryn didn't really care for it.
I'm not at all surprised, because there's nothing to hook onto for a casual reader. Unless you're a hardcore continuity junkie, there's no hook.
It just turned into a long conversation about manga, actually.
Oh, God.
But so for the people listening,
yes.
We've had my wife on here before, but she enjoys comics, not to the extent that perhaps Aaron and I, probably read too many comics. Right. But she's especially fond of Japanese comics, and she likes reading stories in their entirety. So she's generally not into monthly comics, but if you give her a completed story, she's usually pretty excited to check it out. Mm-hmm. So I gave her I asked her to read this to see what her opinion would be after it had completed. And I mean, she was nonplussed. And not as like a person who's not into comics, but like as a person who actually quite likes comics. I mean,
right.
She read Nausicaa with us. She's read all of Akira. She read all of Battle Angel. She's read a lot of indie stuff that's not Japanese that we talked about. And she was just like, I don't really get it. Like, actually echoing your words, she got to the end and she was like, so like, why does it even matter that like these space aliens are doing this? Like, she really was just like, why? So it's interesting to see, a person who's versed in comics but has no interest in the X-Men bring no emotional attachment to it and just kind of walk away like,
yeah, totally. Well, that warms the cockles of my cold dead heart. Give Taryn my regards. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to hear that.
maybe we can, let Hickman get an arc out. We can read it. We can reassess, and we can have her on the next conversation. And
maybe we'll see. The cynical jerk in me is saying he already had 12 freaking issues. Like, my God, what more do you need? You know what I mean? Like,
is it possible that these 12 issues? I mean, this is just pure speculation. Is it possible that they existed purely for the X-Men fans who needed to have all of their babies in continuity tied into things so they didn't feel like X-Men #1 was abandoning them?
Yeah.
But
basically.
So what I'm saying is it possible maybe the real story happens with his proper run?
Yeah.
And just invest in it. Just give it a chance.
Yeah.
I promise it'll get good.
Maybe. I don't know.
All right. Now that we've you just see the death and sadness in your eyes as we've reached this part of the conversation.
I know. Well, I almost don't have anything else to say. I have several notes. There's only one other thing I wanted to talk about. This is a total like non sequitur. This doesn't follow in the conversation. But I wrote in my notes, so how about that Mr. Sinister? I'm a lapsed
it was one of my
X-Men
favorite
fan.
parts.
Okay, I'm a lapsed X-Men fan.
Yeah.
And I'll first of all, I'll just be upfront. I've never particularly felt one way or the other about Mr. Sinister as a character. Like, I actually think that the character kind of people like him probably more than he deserves because he was part of a mystery plot, maybe even like a precursor to the Lost style storytelling that we've been complaining about. Because he was part of a grand conspiracy that involved the Summers brothers and genetic manipulation. So he was always inserted into these like red herring stories, which makes him important, but also
never really went anywhere.
Yeah, never went
really
anywhere.
Mattered, was never thematically
didn't
compelling.
mean anything. Not particularly interesting.
Yeah.
Beyond the fact that it's a red herring story, which means that in the moment you're interested in it, but then you realize it was nothing.
Yeah.
So I was reading this issue. I haven't read any I don't remember the last time I've read a comic that had Mr. Sinister in it. Mm-hmm. I guess the last one I would have read would have been an Age of Apocalypse comic in like the 90s. Would have been like the last time I really remember having a comic book with that character in it.
Sure.
So what happened with this character? Like what like did they is this a diversity hire? Like did they turn him gay or something? I'm just gonna be blunt and go there. Like, what's going on?
I don't know because I haven't read most X-Men comics that have come out lately, last decade.
Yeah.
I read a little snippet that he gave him a similar voice in his Avengers run briefly or something. I don't know. Like that, so that Hickman was kind of playing with this. I agree with you. I don't really know how we got here. But as simply a let's delight in the moment, not looking at other things. It was really easy for me to read this character as having Tim Curry's voice from Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Sure.
And that was a lot more interesting than Mr. Sinister's ever been.
Right. Well, that's kind of where I was going with this. Is like I'm not even saying I dislike it. I actually think it probably kind of works for the character. It definitely helps distinguish him as having a unique voice. And it's like, okay, he's kind of a weirdo anyway, like whatever the character's supposed to be, because it's been so long and convoluted of like what he's supposed to be. It's like, okay, he's a geneticist. He like makes clones and he's just a big effeminate weirdo now. All right.
Castle and he clones himself, and I guess he's a raging effeminate narcissist.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that kind of works for the characterization, but like I just didn't know how he got here. Like,
yeah. I'm going to claim ignorance on that. I don't know.
Like I didn't have a problem with it, but it was very distracting. Like in a like, well, because the rest of the series felt so much like it was like pandering to almost like continuity and nostalgia, and this,
like the characters you've always known.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And this, I mean, like Wolverine's wearing the brown costume half the time. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Doesn't get much better than that. But
love the brown costume.
Right. But he even goes so far as like in the like supplemental material of having like Mr. Sinister's like catty Vogue magazine article. And I was like, okay, this is kind of funny. I mean, I don't dislike it. I'm just like I was totally at a loss of like where did this come from?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was actually, for what I know of Hickman and what I've read of Hickman, given that he is often kind of clinical and hard sci-fi and prone to these big cerebral long form ideas, that seeing him ham it up a little was like unexpected.
Yeah, no, that was kind of my thought too.
Okay.
I was like, this character stands out so much in a Hickman story. Like he's so exuberant and, like you said, hamming it up.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it being a character that's not normally how that character acts. In a cold clinical story, it was just so weird. It was so strange. But I mean, it was almost a breath of fresh air of like it was like so silly, like the Sinister scene where that Magneto and Xavier go to meet Sinister. And it was just absurd. Like I had to check. I was like, am I reading the same book? Like nothing has been this silly up until this point. You know, like he just decided we needed to have a comedy scene all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it was fine. I liked it. It was funny.
Sure.
But it was kind of strange. But I didn't hate it. I'll say that I didn't hate it.
All right. Yeah. Say about the same. Like kind of out of left field, but I was entertained.
Yeah.
I was a lot more entertained than some of the later issues about like the Paragon 5 who mastered death through a needlessly convoluted and uninteresting process that I wasn't really sure why it was even like needing to be explained.
Yeah.
Yeah. That actually was around where the book lost me, or where I think you kind of were like, I'll wait till it's all done to read it before me.
Yeah.
That issue in particular, I was like, okay, so we're trying really hard to establish the strangeness of like this mutant nation that's unlike anything else, but also it's just needlessly, it was inelegant.
Like, yeah.
Just the issue was inelegant. The process, like, I mean, we've established that Sinister is this master of genetics who can catalog all genes and can clone pretty much anything he wants. But then we also need this like 5-person team working with these plant pods to also clone mutants.
Right.
Like, isn't it enough to say we got Sinister, we're cloning mutants?
Yeah, Sinister's on our side now. We can clone bodies. Yeah.
That pretentious actually comes to mind there. Like he was trying so hard to like, and we've mastered death, and these are the holders, the high priests who have
Yeah, I agree.
Didn't do anything for me. I'm getting nitpicky now.
Nah.
We're late in the conversation. This is just me bitching. So,
but I agree. I was, in short, starting out. I was like way into it starting out. I was like, interesting setup. I like, some of the characterization going here. I like the broad scope. I like the big picture ideas. But my God, 12 issues. And then by the end of it, it's all just, it feels very pointless. Like I just don't get, there's no narrative here. Like it's all set up, and that's, I'm not opposed to doing something that's mostly set up, but you have to have a narrative, and it shouldn't feel like it drags on and on and on and on. You set it up, and then you get going.
Right.
You know what I mean? Set it up, and then tell your story. So
save us all the trouble. Just write a 1-page piece of prose explaining the new status quo, and then tell us. Like we could have skipped all that.
Yeah. Can you imagine reading the entirety of the Silmarillion before you're allowed to read The Hobbit?
Right. I wouldn't read The Hobbit.
I'm just going to throw that out there. Right? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of that's an unfair comparison, but I think thematically, I think that fits. It's the point. Yeah, I think that fits my point.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, Hickman's House of X, Powers of X isn't nearly as dense or dry as the Silmarillion, but I mean.
Sure.
Maybe I don't even know because I haven't even bothered to finish the Silmarillion, but I tried.
Never made it through that.
Yeah.
God knows I tried.
Yeah, God knows. But I feel that it's an apt comparison in style. Like, just give me a story with some characters and put your ideas in there and let me see how characters deal with it. And, So, I don't know. I don't know if there's much else to talk about in this book. I'm not even going to say whether or not we both liked or disliked it. You got to listen to this whole 2-hour rambling nonsense to determine just exactly in which specific ways we did like and did dislike it.
It can be both.
I will say, so there's one other thing that I've been thinking about, and I don't think we're going to touch on it right now. Maybe we'll save this for its own podcast. But I will say one thing about this book.
Mm-hmm.
It really made me think about the metaphor. The metaphor of what the X-Men represents.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of a central thing.
Mm-hmm.
I have said, I think on this podcast, probably in our X-Men episodes, I have said on this podcast that I think that the X-Men might be one of, if not the greatest piece of American pop culture fiction that has ever been created. The mythology, the idea of it, I think is brilliant. I think it works in many ways. The problem, it being an ongoing comic book that has existed for like 50 years, means that it's way more unreadable stuff than readable stuff. But on the whole, I have kind of an undying devotion to the X-Men as an idea. I love it. And part of that has to do with the metaphor.
The metaphor.
You know. And I don't think we have time we can do a whole episode on this. But this book did make me think a lot about the metaphor of like what the X-Men represents and how it has been used and abused by different writers in the past. You've probably heard, I mean, I know we've complained about it. I can't remember if we have on any podcast, but I know we've talked about it a lot. But I'm left kind of ambivalent about Hickman's run and his approach to the metaphor. The metaphor being, of course, that the X-Men represent minority figures in society, you know. So in we talked about this in the Stanley Jack Kirby issues. They're obviously kind of allegorical to civil rights at the time, and you know, the X-Men can be considered a metaphor for Black people living in America. And then that kind of continued for a long time, and then in the 80s, and then in I don't know when it was, probably more like in the 90s, more in the 2000s, it became kind of a central metaphor for gay rights. You know, the X-Men came to represent, you know, gay people. But the magic of it is that really ultimately it just represents any minority. That's how the malleability of the metaphor, it can be applied in any way like that. So the way Hickman wrote these characters, like I said, I'm ambivalent. I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of sick of the separatist tones and ideology that writers have been infusing with the X-Men for the last several years. And what was kind of what made me on edge reading this series was that I couldn't tell where Hickman was going with that. With the whole thing of, okay, Xavier is going to create his own nation, invite all the mutants to just leave, you know, everybody come to Krakoa and it's going to be our mutant, you know, the separatist tones. And I couldn't tell if that was a setup for something, you know, like, is this Xavier's big idea that he's never tried before? Which we've already discussed is, you know, it has been tried before, but I don't know if I'm supposed to be meant to believe that it's never been tried before. You know, this gets back to that weird thing of, you know, how much continuity are we going to accept here? You know, do we just ignore the time Cable created a technological island in the issues of Fabian Niciez's Cable and Deadpool and offered amnesty to all mutants to just come and live? Or the time they moved to San Francisco? I mean, exactly. Yeah, like this has been done. Like, this is the thing. But I don't know if I'm supposed to think that it's been done or not, you know, because of the way this whole like vague continuity thing works. But yeah, so I guess long story short, I've not enjoyed the separatist ideas and this idea that this human mutant war, and that one side is constantly trying to extinguish the other side. That's why we have to, you know, we're fighting for our very life and our very survival. And I think that's very strange. Because I think that kind of is a twist, or maybe even a reversion of what the original metaphor was.
Right.
Which was inclusion.
Breaks down in some uncomfortable ways.
Yes.
Like you suddenly can't apply it to certain things so well.
Exactly. It limits the scope of what the metaphor is.
Yeah. Because
really, at the end of the day, I am actually of the opinion, and I can see why people want to latch onto the metaphor for being about you know, like Black people or gay people or the trans community or any, you know what I mean? I can see, you know, because why you want to latch onto that, because it very obviously can work like that, and it's pop culture, and it's very prominent pop culture. But at the end of the day, I think the reason that the X-Men work so well, and the reason that they've resonated with so many people, and the reason that the metaphor works so well is because it actually isn't specifically about that. It's more just about people who feel like an outcast in society. Mm-hmm. Or more to the point, I would actually take it a step further. It's really about something even more universal. It's about sex and puberty and adolescence, because that's really what Stan Lee's comics were about in the 60s. And so it's really about, I mean, there's a reason mutation manifests during puberty, right? Like that's been something that's stuck with the X-Men mythos. Even in Hickman's run, he talks about like the danger of Moira if she gets killed before her mutant powers manifest. Why do the mutant powers manifest at puberty? If we're being all like super scientific and clinical about how mutants work in the moment, why do they manifest at puberty? They just do. Oh, maybe because it's a metaphor for adolescence and puberty, right? Like that seems to be the number one thing that it's a metaphor for. It's a metaphor for teenagers being outcast in society. And then it can be applied to all these other things.
Yeah.
So I think there's a danger when you start overemphasizing how it's really about, Jews. It's really about Black people. It's, it's really about this. And then you start taking it in these specific directions. And I think it loses its universality.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that push and pull of how the metaphor has been directed, it's a whole nother podcast.
It is. It really is. And I didn't even mean to go into that much just now. Like, we're actually kind of,
It's also really hard to tell where Hickman's going with
it. But that's really what I was getting at, is I could not tell. Because when I first started, when the series started, I was kind of like, okay, like where's, it's like, I don't like this idea that Xavier's starting a new island and just, like, oh, they're just going to mutant laws. They're not going to abide by human laws. It's all mutant laws now. And I'm like, that's separatist tones. That's like that's a bad ideology. And that's my opinion. But I can't tell if I'm supposed to think that that's a bad ideology, that Xavier is going down a bad ideological road, or if I'm supposed to think that that's actually a good idea and Xavier's just had this brilliant revelation. So maybe
I feel like Hickman is preying on that tension.
I agree.
It feels a little dishonest.
That's exactly right. So I was going to say, like, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the cleverness of Hickman's writing, is that you don't know which way you're supposed to feel. But as you said, it also feels somewhat dishonest because I don't feel like it's making a point, like in any way.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with it.
I don't know either.
No, we got 12 issues that were set up that actually didn't really resolve any of that. So I don't know.
Well, I'm curious to see where it goes. Are you going to read the rest of Hickman's series?
I'm going to continue to check out Hickman's X-Men for the time being. See how it goes. I reserve the right to drop it at any time. But,
right.
Usually
you're in this far.
Yeah.
I honestly, I haven't decided. Yeah. I might pick up trades. I don't know. I don't read monthly comic books anymore. So I'll be curious. To be perfectly honest, I think what's going to happen is you'll probably read the issues and then you'll tell me what you thought about them. And then I'll decide whether or not I'm going to read them. Yeah.
I'll demand that I have someone to talk to about these things for 2 hours.
Yes, exactly.
Camera. And then you'll check it out.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do another podcast on it. I mean, maybe we'll follow up on all these things we're complaining about and Hickman will address them and we'll look like idiots.
Maybe someone's cracked the code and it was all there the whole time.
Maybe I've been complaining about nothing. If
we just deciphered those Krakoan alphabets and shuffled around the reading order a little.
Yeah. Maybe. Maybe.
All right. Well, I don't have any other thoughts. I feel
Me neither.
2 hours of dense Hickman thoughts.
We've been going for quite some time, actually. I knew this would be one of our longer podcasts because it's the X-Men. But
it's the hot topic right now.
It is. So I think we did actually cover most everything. Yeah, I mean, you know what? We spent like close to 2 hours, and the only thing we didn't talk about was the art. This is the kind of book I almost feel weird talking about the art because sounds really dismissive, but I almost feel like there's not much of a point in talking about the art. It's the artists are good, perfectly fine, acceptable, even skilled, I would say, at their craft, but they're also it's kind of the Marvel House style. I don't know, nothing really jumped out at me. It feels very homogenous.
I thought technically they're both excellent.
Yeah.
But they're not particularly. I mean, they look very similar. Not exactly similar, but they kind of both seem to be of that Stuart Immonen. Time after Stuart Immonen camp.
I was just about to say
that kind of look.
I don't know if I could distinguish these pages from like Stuart Immonen or Oliver Copiel or I can't think of.
I could, but
but you're an artist. I'm just a stupid casual. Like, I'm not an artist. I mean, I probably could too, but they feel just kind of in that same wheelhouse. Like,
sure.
I'm hesitating to say derivative because I don't necessarily mean derivative because it's good art, but I also don't. I feel like it's not particularly. It doesn't have a particular identity to the art. And I think this is kind of a general problem, that suffers with Marvel and DC corporate comics in general, is that you're kind of a slave to the house style. You're kind of beholden to, like what needs to be. I mean, there's a reason a lot of DC books look like they're all aping Jim Lee, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the artists don't take.
They don't take anything away from it. I guess that's just a nice thing to say.
I'm trying to think of a way to say this that doesn't sound dismissive because I think they're technically excellent artists.
I agree, and that's why I say I feel bad for sounding like I'm really dismissive because technically excellent is a good way to put it. They are technically excellent, but it was also, I don't know, I was kind of unmoved by it. Like, it didn't resonate with me.
Yeah, I hear you, and I mean, really, it was a book that. The weirdness and the ideas are so front and center that you're not really thinking as much about.
It's not an artist book.
It's I mean, I think people get maybe more jazzed about art when their favorite characters are like front and center and are like the writers selling you on. You're engaging the person of like, oh man, he draws a great Wolverine. I really like how Wolverine is coming across here. And both of these series were really about like hopping back and forth in time and showing weird science fiction things happening. And I think because we never really had a strong character focus, the art doesn't play to that, and so you don't think about it maybe to the same extent.
I think that's actually a very good point, and that makes sense to me. Again, well, it's the whole thing of like getting like characters, like getting attached to characters is what gets you invested in a story. And makes perfect sense that's how you would get invested in art. If you're seeing this character over and over again, it's what you like the way they draw the character. But like there's not. It felt, I don't know, it was just there. It accomplished its goal, and I sound like a jerk, but. All right. On that note. On that somewhat uninspiring note, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, if you made it all the way through this. Thanks for listening. My name is Aaron Walther. You can find comics that I write at aaronwalther.com. And if you feel like it, you can make videos nitpicking everything that I write and criticizing all the stuff that I do, the same way I do to other comic book creators. I won't stop you. You can read I currently have an ongoing webcomic called Uncontrollable Reclass at reclasscomic.com, and my latest finished book, American Chop Suey, with artist Ed Bickford, is for sale on my website, aaronwalther.com. You can, right now it's up for pre-order. I'm going to be at a comic book convention this weekend at AirCap in Wichita, Kansas. So if you're in the Midwest, I'll be there. We'll be selling copies of American Chop Suey. Check it out. And you can, I shouldn't forget, you can find MP3s of this podcast at comicdna.podbean.com. Thanks everybody for listening or watching, and we'll see y'all next time.